One day, as he contemplated what had become of the faith of Abraham, he publicly mourned the fate of the temple and made a rather dire prediction found in Matthew chapter 23. "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. But you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate." Of course, this really bothered the disciples because it was a clear allusion to the Babylonian destruction of the temple, when the sins of God's people had become so egregious that the rituals at the temple became meaningless. The religion was just a matter of going through the motions. But now groups like the Pharisees were working overtime to make sure nobody even got close to sinning like the ancestors did. Jesus, however, was underwhelmed by the Pharisees' efforts and openly condemned the way they conducted themselves. "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites," he said, "for you are like whitewashed tombs, which indeed appear beautiful outwardly, but inside are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. Even so, you also outwardly appear righteous to men, but inside you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness." It was all very concerning to the disciples, who ironically began to make the same plea as the false prophets of Jeremiah's day. They appealed to the temple. Here's what it says in Matthew 24, right after Jesus predicted that the temple would be left desolate. "Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, 'Do you not see all these things? Assuredly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down.'" Of course, in hindsight, we all know that Jesus was completely right. A few years later, in AD 70, in the midst of a rebellion that the Romans wanted to squash, one soldier pushed a lit torch inside the temple and it lit the entire place on fire. The temple burned to the ground along with the zealots who were hiding inside, and when the flames finally died down, the Romans disassembled what was left, block by block, essentially creating the Temple Mount that you can still see to this day, which is nothing but a single wall where people come to pray. What's amazing about this national tragedy is the way that it was entirely predictable, and not just because Jesus announced it just a few years before it happened. The fate of the temple had actually been predicted during the Babylonian captivity, hundreds of years in the past. The Temple Mount in Jerusalem is still one of the world's most contentious spots. Today it's controlled by Muslims, and it features the Dome of the Rock, a magnificent shrine that marks the place where they believe is the spot where Muhammad began his miraculous night journey, which he said was a visit to heaven. Now, today there's a segment of Western Christianity that believes that in order for Christ to return, the Jews must reclaim the Temple Mount and build a third temple, which of course poses a bit of a problem because in order to do that, you'd have to compromise one of the holiest sites in Islam. The potential for an international incident is absolutely massive. All it would take to spark a major conflict is for one well-meaning zealot to do something, well, radical. Right now, as it stands, non-Muslims are not even allowed to pray on the Temple Mount, which is admittedly a hard thing to enforce, but the regulation is there. The Muslims are determined that this spot belongs to them. Now, just before the break, I said that the destruction of the Second Temple was actually predicted during the Babylonian captivity. And right now I'm going to demonstrate that. So you might want to grab a copy of the Bible and follow along, because we're going to look at a passage from the Old Testament that in recent times has been taken out of its context to make it say things it was never intended to say. I'm talking about Daniel chapter 9, which a lot of modern Western Christians assume is talking about a last day scenario in which the Antichrist starts to make trouble for the entire planet. But that's a relatively modern understanding that would come as a surprise to roughly 1,800 years worth of Christians who didn't read it that way.